What's up, owner investor? In this video, we're going to discuss how to think about how big or small a business can get over, the next 5 to 10 years. So let's just use Airbnb as an example, since we've already kind of been talking about it. Um, so the main kind of framework that we use to figure this out is we first need to figure out how big the addressable market is for the company we're looking at, right? So for Airbnb, the addressable market, I believe they disclosed this $3.4 trillion number in one of their filings. So let's see, Airbnb. I usually go to the prospectus, the S1, to find this information. Um, uh, Addressable. Okay, here we go. So total our serviceable addressable market to be 1.5 trillion, including 1.2 trillion for short-term stays and 239 billion dollars for. So this is basically what they're saying is they have, they probably hired some consultants, and to do some market sizing exercise where they take in a bunch of available data, maybe conduct some surveys, do some extrapolation. These are estimates, right? This isn't like the actual number, right? There's this really important mental model that like kind of the map isn't the territory, and this is a perfect example of that. This is an estimate. So they probably hired some consultants to do this, come up with this number. And the number they've come up with is globally there's about 1.5 trillion dollars spent in the travel market and the experience economy, as they've labeled that. $1.2 trillion dollars for short-term stays, 239 billion for experiences. They're defining that as their serviceable market. We estimate our total addressable market to be 3.4 trillion, including 1.8 trillion for short-term stays, 210 billion for long-term stays. The estimate is key components of our SAM and our TAM using 2019 annual figures with the market opportunity growth long-term. Yeah, so that's another important thing is that in some so the first step is kind of figuring out what market the business you're looking at is operating in and kind of sizing that, right? Which is it's more of an art than a science, really. So you can Google total hotel spend global, and that comes out to like 4.5 trillion. Airbnb's estimate is like also in the low single digit trillions. So this is a huge, huge market, right? So smart people will disagree on what to include, what not to include. The point isn't to build like a 10,000 line Excel model to figure out like precisely how big this market is. You just kind of want to be like in a rough ballpark of like can the business comfortably 5x, like 2x, 5x, 10x, 100x, 1000x, right, in size. And remember, we're not quite at the point where we're answering how likely is it that this could happen. We're just trying to see what's possible at this phase, right? So this is pretty big. When you just kind of Google around how big the hospitality industry is. The other data point to kind of look at is just their most recent revenue growth. Let's see, earnings release, Q1 shareholder letter. Okay, so so if you think that, for example, a business is, you know, you know, is like only 1% penetrated in its market and you think it can grow really fast for a long period of time, and then you go to the actual results and you see that it's only grown like 2% or 5%, or maybe it even declined, that's going to be kind of a red flag, right? That's kind of a contradiction that you're going to have to resolve, right? But in this case, we can see that Airbnb is growing revenue at like, 24% year over year, excluding the impact of foreign exchange. So clearly they're, growing fast, pretty fast, right? Like well into the double digits. So we know that they're probably taking share, right? The other aspect of this is in some markets, the addressable market is growing. In some markets, the addressable market is flat. In some markets, the addressable market is declining, right? The travel industry is one of those things where, like, global travel spend per year, it grows, I think, like mid single digits every year because um, people in developed countries, you just think about broadly, right? 8 billion people on the planet, and generally the direction that we're seeing is that the average person is getting wealthier than, over time, right? And as people get more money, as they generally have more um, uh, money to spend on experiences and travel. And so, particularly if you look at like Latin America or like emerging economies like in Latin America or in India, travel spend per capita, which means like the average amount of money that like a person spends on travel, it increases, anywhere from like 5 to 10% per year, right? So so Airbnb gets to ride that kind of five, let's just call it like 5% growth per year just from the travel industry growing. And then on top of that, they're taking market share because, um, you know, it's a better experience for, there's some places in the world where there's no hotels and there's only Airbnbs. Some people prefer the Airbnb experience. It's like a unique experience. Sometimes it's a lot cheaper than a hotel because there aren't all those costs of like, having all the staff and cleaning and all that stuff. Um, and sometimes there's just lots of other reasons why Airbnb might be taking share. And it's kind of up to you to figure out, okay, like where can that market penetration get to in 5 to 10 years, right? But growth isn't something that you just kind of like pull out of your ass. I mean, not completely. There are assumptions that are made, but this is the general framework to follow, right? To first kind of figure out the addressable market, and then so this is 2022. So if we were gonna kind of build out like a 10-year forecast, these are just made up numbers, right? Again, I really want to emphasize this is not financial advice. I'm not saying this is exactly what's going to happen to Airbnb at all. I have no idea what's going to happen to Airbnb. I've never actually even in depth like done any research on Airbnb. This is just kind of a simple example that I thought everyone would be familiar with, right? So, okay, so 3.4 trillion. So let's say that's the addressable market, and let's say we think that's going to grow at 5% per year. So this times 1 plus 5%. I'm going to go ahead and anchor this so we can paste this across. Cool. Okay, so then we'll call this the market penetration instead of market share. Penetration. Right. So this is kind of where it's going to get a little challenging, right? Like where you're going to have to think about like, okay, what's reasonable, what's not reasonable, what do some of the what do other people think based on like research that they've done? Not necessarily to just adopt their opinions, but just to kind of look at the facts and stuff they've gathered, right? So this is why we go to websites like Value Investors Club, Seeking Alpha, Substack, read news articles. Another thing we can do is look at analyst estimates. So again, normally you kind of want to do this in a vacuum, like on your own, and then compare to an analyst. But I just want to kind of give you all the options that are available first, because you don't want other people's opinions to cloud your judgment. You just want to leverage other people's research, and then you want to check, what the analyst estimates are to make sure you're not like way off. And even if you are way off, then you kind of have to come to, you have to kind of figure out why you're either way below or way above, and whether you're more likely to be right or wrong, right? And kind of get into like why the estimates are differing, right? So I have a paid membership for Ticker.com. I think on the free one, you get like a couple years of estimates. So, analysts have revenue kind of growing at like the low teens, like in the 13 to 15% range for the next 5 years. So, I don't know. You can make a case that that's actually a little too low because the travel industry itself is growing at, um, probably like 5-ish% range. And then on top of that, Airbnb is taking share. It's like this tech-enabled model. They have a slick app, very good user experience. You can look at the growth and the users, the hosts. Kind of have to figure out like, in what situations does Airbnb end up taking a lot of share? um, whether they can really like disrupt hotels in a very big way, or whether this is kind of more of a whether there's a niche aspect within the addressable market that Airbnb is constrained to. Like, there's no way I'm going to be able to do all of that in this video, right? I'm just kind of giving you the ideas, kind of what to look for when you're doing the research on your own and using Airbnb as an example. But um, the other thing I wanted to highlight here, so okay, so let's just say we think Airbnb, can grow. So if we think that let's just say so remember Airbnb, the way the business model works is that there's a certain dollar amount that's spent on the platform, and then they take a percentage of that, right? So this $3 trillion, this is not really the addressable market for revenue. That's the addressable market for kind of the gross booking value. So let's just say the take rate, they don't really increase the take rate. Let's just say the take rate stays constant at 13%. I mean, you might do research and come to a different conclusion than that, right? So that's totally fine. And let's just say they can grow the penetration at 15% per year, which kind of brings your total revenue growth to around 20%. So this times one plus this. Um, this a percentage. Oops. All right. Throw a little border on here. Okay, so 3 trillion times this. Get rid of these decimals. Not looking for that level of precision. Okay, so then, this would imply that Airbnb becomes like 7.5% of the global travel industry, right? So you'd have to do the research to figure out like, is that reasonable? Like, you can talk to experts in the industry, former employees of Airbnb, people that work in hotels. Like, you're going to get a bunch of conflicting views, and then you kind of have to reconcile those different conflicting views and come to kind of a reasonable assumption of your own that you'd like to make. And then you just multiply this by this, and then you can get the revenue. This, and then let's just say the gross margin stays the same, 82%. Because so this is where you know your research from the previous section would come in. Like, okay, like is this um, you know uh, is this a defensible business, right? Like, one of the concerns might be actually there's a lot of places where Airbnb might be banned because the you know the the hotel lobbyists end up like convincing the governments to ban Airbnb the same way they do with like Uber and Lyft in a lot of countries. Um, or what do you think is the likelihood that there's a competitor to Airbnb that comes in, um, you know, uh, or maybe you think that Airbnb is a highly defensible business because they have all these network effects, and so you think the economics will either stay the same or potentially even get better. Those are all kind of questions that you would want to have answers to or have some notion of before you kind of do this exercise, because then you're just like playing around with random numbers and you don't want to do that. I'm just doing like putting in numbers just to kind of show you how this forecast should flow and how this kind of just mechanically works in Excel. So then, multiply this by the gross margin, kind of, and then let's just say the OpEx, there's always some level of, I think inflation is like 5% of the US, but, I think consensus view is that that'll come down to like the 3-4% range over time. And then, they're gonna have to add more staff, to kind of sustain this growth. So, let's kind of assume that in last year this grew at like 15%. So let's just say that operating expenses grow at 10% per year for the next 10 years. Again, this is just a random assumption that I'm just showing you how to work the Excel mechanically. Um, plus this. All right, and let's just say this is like the same, and then let's just say this is also the same. Um, yeah, okay, all right. So this is kind of our business forecast, right? Like, um, we under these assumptions, the kind of key assumptions we made are right here. We'll highlight them in blue. This, and this. But it's really like these two assumptions are like the big drivers of this forecast, right? How how much the addressable market grows every year, and you know what the market penetration is, right? I mean, for even some more context, right? You can compare this global travel spend to like the global GDP, right? Global GDP is like in 2022 like $100 trillion, right? So you know, is it reasonable that like people spend 3.4 trillion of that on travel? Yeah, like that seems, that doesn't seem too far out of the ordinary, at least to me. Um, it's all about this exercise of like how big or small a company can get. It's just used like finding little numbers here and there to like you know create some context um, around the growth rate or the decline rate of a company, right? So it's not always growth rate, right? Like if you're looking at like a dying company, like I don't know, if you're looking at like Bed Bath and Beyond or something, um, you would, you'd have to look at PVPY, um, and you know, they're already kind of declining revenue, like a lot, right? Like 17% decline, 14, 15% decline, 32% decline, right? So you'd have to kind of think about like, okay, what can this $5.3 billion get to? Should this company even exist, right? If Amazon is just going to destroy this entire company if they can't even cover their fixed costs, right? I mean, they're losing like $1 billion of operating income every year. Or maybe you think that this company can be turned around, right? Like maybe there's some kind of niche where they can continue to survive at a much lower cost base and a much lower revenue base. So it really depends what kind of company you're looking at, right? Like, is this a growing company? Is it a declining company? What's the addressable market? Are they getting disrupted? Are they the disruptor? Those are kind of things to be thinking about. And you leverage other people's research, right? Like, look at this. Like on Value Investors Club, there's like 17 messages, right? Like you read all these. They provide links. You can go on Twitter. There's no shortage of resources where you can leverage other people's work, right? So again, like don't look for their opinions. Look for the research, right? Like look for the figures. Like look at this. Like this guy did. Well, not this person, I should say. I looked at like Google search, right? Airbnb versus Hotels.com versus Booking.com versus VRBO, whatever that is. Oh, Expedia. Okay. You can see that like Airbnb is like much more popular, right? That's an interesting data point. Like this is data that like this person collected, right? It's not that person's opinion. Um, and then you can use some of their opinions, right? But just kind of make sure that you're not just, blindly following other people without kind of knowing what's going on yourself, right? Because then if you do that, then and a company misses earnings and the stock is down 20%, you're not going to know what to do. And that's kind of just a learning process. I've made that mistake of being lazy and like using other people's work and like not doing it on my own. And then, if company prints a bad quarter and then I'm just like, I've been in that situation before. So, um, definitely do your own work. Like find your own figures. I mean, ChatGPT can help you in this area, but I usually, if they do give you a number, ask for a link on ChatGPT because a lot of times the numbers are really off or inaccurate. So yeah, I mean, this is all about just like it's just like doing the numbers and the math are like pretty straightforward. There's no like complicated things that you have to do. It's like addition, subtraction, division, and multiplication, but it's just like linking together a bunch of different story problems. Um, and yeah, that's it for this video. As always, comments, questions, random thoughts below, and I'll see you in the next one.